Welcome into CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday. It's Wednesday morning, and as we all know, I've got a newborn at home, so I'm just exhausted. But Ben's just cracking the whip on me, like, "Hey, I got to get home to Oklahoma for Thanksgiving and an Iowa State football game." So to accommodate Ben's schedule, we're going a little bit earlier than normal. So hopefully, you guys see this episode a little bit earlier than normal. But you know, that opening aside, Ben, it's very windy in Cedar Rapids today. What's the weather like in Ames? Are you going to be battling? Are you just going to be fighting that car all over the road today?
It sounds like it, Ethan. I mean, I can't wait to drive through these Flint Hills and just get tossed all around, man. It's gonna be incredible. I last night, I don't have a baby, but I was up late watching Iowa State to try and figure out what kind of matchup they were gonna get as this Players Era Festival bracket is just a bleep show. And ultimately at 11:30 we find out Iowa State's playing Syracuse and then the wind is blowing. Man, it was not a great night. Not a lot of sleep for your boy.
It's not a fun drive either. You spend a lot of time in Kansas, not a lot going on in Kansas. The one good thing though is because it's so desolate, is they just randomly have gas stations and two restaurants in the middle of nowhere, like in between on the interstate. It's incredible. I've never seen it before.
Oh yeah.
We need to adapt that in Montana because basically you have one stop from my hometown to the big city in Billings, Montana. You got one stop that's Miles City. Maybe you want to stop in Glendive, but not really because Glendive stinks. That's the rival town to my high school. But it's fantastic in Kansas. You just driving along and all of a sudden a Taco John's pops up out of nowhere. You're like, oh, I love potato olays. I'm gonna stop at Taco John's. What we don't love is going 2-0 in a tournament with a plus 19 point differential and ending up in the fifth place game or the consolation bracket, whatever you want to call it. What happened here? And now they're out on the big payday, as I understand it, for the NIL deal. Though I have not read your exceptional story on the QuadCityTimes.com because you're a Quad Cities writer. What can you tell me about the Players Era tournament and what's gone wrong for the Cyclones off the court?
Yes, as I was continuing my beat coverage for the Quad City Times as a Quad City Times reporter, I learned that the top four teams get these massive additional bonus payouts, right? Everybody gets $1 million for playing in the Players Era Invitational. Iowa State's already received that money, and they've already kind of, earmarked that and counted on that. They were playing potentially for another $1 million for a first place finish or $500,000 for second. I think it's $300,000 for third and $200,000 for fourth place. Any of those would have been significant when you think about the top end guys on Iowa State's roster making about $1.7 million. That's huge for next season and what that brings. And Iowa State's just on the outside looking in for those money games. Because Iowa State had a plus 19 point differential, they're behind the Kansas Jayhawks, who finished with a plus 21 point differential. And when something like this happens, and you think about the margins that yield a potentially $200,000 payout, it's brutal. When you think about Dylan Mitchell's last second layup for St. John's, that we thought was inconsequential, but turns out to be very consequential. At the end of the Creighton game, Ethan, Milan Momcilovic had an option to shoot a three-pointer, and from what it looked like on the TV broadcast, he was told not to shoot it. Of course, TJ Otzelberger and Greg McDermott are great friends, lots of respect there. You don't necessarily blame them for not showing up your team, but that could have been the difference if that shot goes in. Which, man, that's just wild to think about, but that's college sports nowadays. That's this tournament. The solace for Iowa State fans here is these wins will look better in March. They hurt right now, but they'll feel better in March. Specifically, the St. John's win, 1 point win. Iowa State did it in the last 2 minutes without Taman Lipsey. The Creighton game, we'll see how well that looks. I don't know if anybody thinks Creighton looked like a fantastic team. They certainly looked better in the exhibition when they beat Iowa State than they did on Tuesday when they played out in Vegas. And then Iowa State plays Syracuse later. By the time you watch this recording of CyHawk Talk, that game will already have been played. So ultimately, it's a resume booster for Iowa State, specifically the St. John's game. But gosh, it hurts a lot right now when you think about the margins Iowa State missed out on $200,000 by.
I'm no John Rothstein, so I wasn't like dissecting the Players Era tournament bracket. But how does Iowa, because I feel like St. John's, that's a top 15 team when they played them. And then Creighton was a team that I think a lot of people expected to be a top 25 team this year, particularly with some of the transfer portal additions they were able to make. And Iowa fans are familiar with two of those, and Josh Dix and Owen Freeman. But how does Iowa State's I guess first two games, how does their path to 2-0 compared to Kansas State's or Kansas's path to 2-0? Did Kansas have two lightweights that they just got to beat up on here, or was it fairly even across the board?
Yeah, pretty much. KU got the benefit of playing Notre Dame and Syracuse in its first two games, which I view as easier opponents than St. John's, and maybe Creighton is in that same tier. I think a solution to this, Ethan, would be let's go based off of your point differential against the spread. It's Vegas. Let's use the spreads. I mean, what are we doing here? That way you can factor in the strength of schedule. But I'll say you mentioned the bracket for the Players Era tournament. There is no bracket. That's what makes this tournament, this jamboree festival, I think those are two better words, so weird and so confusing for everybody. I mean, we're all trying to figure this thing out late Tuesday night because there is no bracket. It's a loose, invitational where each team kind of has two randomly picked games, and then you got to uh, find out your next opponent. Iowa State, what? They turn around in less than 24 hours and have to, play a Syracuse team that they've known about playing for like 9 hours. It's just a weird situation. And yeah, man, this thing, the Big 12 is signed a partnership. I wrote about that on one of my takeaways with the Quad City Times. Iowa State needs to get used to playing out here in Vegas, and I think it could be a good thing. This is certainly the feast week tournament you want to be in with that guaranteed $1 million payout, but I think the Players Era tournament has a lot to figure out, and hopefully it will as the field expands toward next season.
Well, you certainly can't complain with getting an opportunity to see some high major opponents that you don't normally see, and also getting the opportunity to kind of prepare as if you're in the NCAA tournament or in the conference tournament, where you're gonna have to play, some games back to back against, high major opponents or talented opponents. So that's certainly some valuable experience, even if they're not coming away with some extra dough. Is Switching things to football, is this a game where you think that Iowa State is going to go ahead and win and get that opportunity to make this season a success, or is Oklahoma State going to be able to get their first conference win in like 500 years?
Not quite. Yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of Oklahoma State's last Big 12 win. And as somebody with a lot of ties to Stillwater, those 2 years have felt like 500 years. I covered Oklahoma State's last Big 12 win when they beat BYU to reach the Big 12 championship game. That's how long it's been. For reference, I wrote this on the Quad City Times, Ethan. That same day that Oklahoma State won its last Big 12 game was the legendary snow game where Abu Sama ran all over Kansas State. So that's just a reference of what kind of drought the Cowboys have been in the last couple seasons. But the question is alive. Is Oklahoma State on win watch? Maybe you have to put the Cowboys on win watch because they are playing a little bit better. Their last two games against Kansas State and UCF have been one-score games. That's the closest Iowa State has been to, or Oklahoma State has been to a Big 12 win this season, and the vibes are up in Stillwater. They announced a new coach, Eric Morris from UNT, is going to be OSU's next coach. So, it's senior day. Matt Campbell mentioned that. He said it's senior day. Um, it's not a place that you can roll into at 11 a.m. on what's going to probably be pretty bad weather and just show up expecting to win. You're going to have to bring and create your own energy. OSU loves the trick plays. You got to keep your head on straight. And I think there's going to be a lot of motivation for those seniors on OSU to go out and get one win, for their interim head coach, Doug Meacham, to go out and win one game for themselves. It's been so long. Those guys are desperate for a win. So it'll be perhaps an interesting thing. Iowa State enters a 14-point favorite. If Iowa State's able to kind of get ahead and maybe put this game to bed, get it in the hands of the run game, and just kind of wear this thing out, then I think that's the recipe. But if the Pokes are able to hang in there, man, you don't want to see what's going to happen with that kind of motivation.
Yeah, you misspoke there at the start that covered Iowa State's last conference win, and that's true. You did cover Iowa State's last conference win, so you didn't even need to correct yourself, even though you also covered Oklahoma State's last conference win. But as you're looking ahead beyond the final game of the regular season, looks like you have some ideas on who Iowa State needs to make a priority to make sure that they don't enter the transfer portal, or if they do, get them back out of the transfer portal and get them on this team next year. Who's the player or players you think that Iowa State needs to hold on to?
Yeah, it's late November and we're already thinking about the transfer portal. That kind of shows you what the state of college athletics is in, but I think you have to be. If you're Derek Hoosier, Iowa State's GM, if you will, you have to be thinking about what your retention priorities are last season. And Ethan, as I'm watching the Cowboys play right now, Marcus Neal, the sophomore defensive back, is quickly rising up my list of players ISU needs to retain. I'd put him at number 2 behind only Rocco Becht. That's how good Marcus Neal has been. He's right now leading Iowa State in tackles. He has 2 interceptions, tied for the team lead in the eye test. He passes with flying colors. He's the most violent football player Iowa State has and has really kind of helped stabilize this secondary after Jonathan Cooper and Jeremiah Jontez Williams and Jeremiah Cooper both tore their ACLs. So Marcus Neal, man, he's a defensive back that Iowa State is going to have to prioritize retaining. You think about Dominic Orange, how he's going to the NFL. You don't have him on the payroll anymore. So I think Marcus Neal is going to be that guy. You could also throw Ben Bramer or perhaps a Carson Hansen in there. Um, both Williams and Cooper will have opportunities to come back to Iowa State if they wish, coming off of injuries. So we'll see what that looks like. If Iowa State's able to retain all 3 of those guys in the secondary, then this becomes a pretty formidable unit heading into next season. But I'd put Marcus Neal at the top of it.
Talking about prioritizing things for different programs, we can go ahead and shift gears into Iowa versus Nebraska. We'll take a look at the Black Friday game, the Heroes game, and talk about what
I call it the Ethan Petrick game, but that's just me.
I mean, certainly should be the new name of it. We can go ahead and edit the Wikipedia page to include that since I cover the Hawks and went to Nebraska. Maybe the Ethan Petrick / David Eicholt game because David also went to Nebraska. But as we're thinking about what you're prioritizing, I think that Nebraska needs to prioritize stopping the run in this game, but they've needed to do that in a number of games this year. And I think that Iowa needs to prioritize running the ball effectively. And I think they've done that wonderfully in a number of games this year. So when you look at how these two teams match up, Iowa does offensively something really well that Nebraska struggles to stop. And so I think that this could end up being a bit of a mismatch on paper, but it's normally a pretty close game. And Nebraska's got one win in the last 10 games, I believe, and 11 of the 14 matchups as conference foes have come down to one score. So I'm not going to come out here and say that this is going to be a blowout. Iowa's going to blow them out. Iowa's done that before, and I'm pretty sure they did it in Lincoln before. I don't believe that game was in Iowa City. It was like 56-10 or something disgusting. But it's a 6-point spread in Vegas. I think I would take Nebraska to cover that spread simply because this is always a close game, and 6 points doesn't quite feel right for this game. Iowa feels like, if we're just going off feel, Iowa feels like a team that is a touchdown better than Nebraska, but I don't know if that's how it's going to play out on the gridiron. I think that this is going to be a sloppy game. It's supposed to snow. The total for the game is 38.5. I think you can probably safely bet the under on that one. Nebraska's offense certainly didn't look fantastic last week against Penn State. I thought against UCLA they played well and were effective in using TJ Lateef, the second string freshman quarterback, well against UCLA, but kind of once you got to they scored 28 points by there was 11 minutes remaining in the third quarter when they got to 28, and they didn't score again for the rest of the game. So I think since that initial run from Lateef, it's kind of just been hanging on for the Nebraska offense. I think that they're not going to be able to effectively move the ball against even a banged up Iowa defense. They're not sure if TJ Hall is going to play this week. So on paper, Iowa seems like a much better team and a team that could blow out Nebraska. Just on the actual playing surface, I don't think that that's going to be the way it plays out.
You mentioned your ties to both of these institutions, Ethan. What does this rivalry mean for these schools?
Yeah, I think back when you think back to 2011 when Nebraska entered the conference and they started to manufacture this rivalry. A lot of people were stubborn, like, oh, we want to play Oklahoma. We want to play Missouri. We want to play Texas every year. Those are our rivals. Those are the teams we hate to play. Well, flash forward 14 years later, and I don't think any team. I think Nebraska fans would trade ever playing either of those three teams ever again if they could just beat Iowa every year. I think that this has certainly become a pretty fierce and intense rivalry for the fans. Kirk Ferentz yesterday, when asked about that, said he thinks it's probably more fans than the players or coaches, but it certainly means a lot. Iowa recruits a lot of guys from Western Iowa, where there is that Nebraska flavor. And I know in the Sioux City area, there's a good number of Nebraska fans. In the Council Bluffs area, that's right on right backed up to Omaha, where there's a lot of Nebraska fans. So I certainly think that the border battle aspect of this game has helped it become a better rivalry. I think its position on the calendar every year has made it become a really fierce rivalry, because when you're looking at Nebraska and what they've been for the last 10 years since they fired Bo Pelini, Iowa's kind of the standard that they fired when they fired Bo Pelini. Iowa wins, 8, 9, 10 games every year, and they call that successful. And they want, the Hawkeyes want to be a college football playoff team. They want to be 12-0 just like everyone else. But they're at least comfortable being that hyper successful, but maybe not necessarily undefeated team. Nebraska wanted to be that undefeated team every year. Bo Pelini won at least 9 games every year, and they fired him for that. And they haven't been anywhere close to that since. And so when you're looking at what Nebraska's been the last 10 years, they want to get to be what Iowa is. So Iowa is the standard. And so every year you get to measure yourself against the standard at the end of the season and find out just how far or just how close you are. Every year I think Nebraska fans come away thinking that they're a lot closer. It certainly looks like they're a lot closer now than they were 5 years ago in year 3 of the Scott Frost era. But I don't know if Nebraska's quite there yet. And we can transition that into, is this Nebraska's Super Bowl? There was some discussion on social media. I think Husker Online's Steve Sipple said, Nebraska needs to win this game to kind of validate its progress under Matt Rule. There were a couple of Nebraska accounts on X who, talked about how if you win this game, you're 8-4. You're feeling pretty good about that. You lose this game, you're 7-5. You might potentially lose the bowl game, and you're just 7-6 again. Sure, you got to that 7 wins in the regular season, but it feels like maybe not much progress was made. And when you factor in the fact that Nebraska had a bit of an easier Big Ten schedule this year, that 7-6 probably isn't going to feel as good as the first 7-6 with a bowl win in a long time. And so I do think that this is Nebraska's Super Bowl. I do think that Iowa should have that motivation on going into this game, that this game means a ton to their opponent, even if it's not for bowl eligibility, a college football playoff spot, any of those things. This is a big game for Nebraska because they need this win to kind of validate what they feel is progress under Matt Rule, even though every November they seem to have this struggle for success where they can get a ton of success in September and October, and then November rolls around and they've won one game each of the last 2 years so far. If they beat Iowa, it would be the first time they won multiple games in November in some time. So it does feel like a hyper important game for Nebraska. And so I think that even though it's not for a bowl game, it's not for a college football playoff spot, there will be two highly motivated teams playing in Lincoln on Friday.
I love that. There's no better way to antagonize a fan base than to talk about we are your Super Bowl. That's kind of the ultimate slight one fan base can give to another.
Well, I think that any Nebraska fan who claims that this isn't the Super Bowl for the Huskers is fooling themselves. I think, like I said, Iowa is what they got to the point after they fired Bo Pelini where it's like, man, if we can just get to 9, 10 wins a year, we'd be satisfied with that. And then you look at Iowa, that's what they do every year. You can depend on that every year from the Hawkeyes. And so it's, they want to be what Iowa is. So that's the standard they're measuring themselves against, and they can't beat Iowa. Like I said, 9 of the last 10 years, it's been the Hawkeyes that have won. And the one year that Nebraska won, it was with an interim coach that was pretty well established, was not going to be taking over as the head coach. Nebraska wasn't playing for a bowl game. So it seemed more like an upset where they just kind of like kicked Iowa on their way down, basically. So it didn't feel like Nebraska was necessarily achieving anything with that win over Iowa. It certainly didn't break the streak. So I just this is a hyper important game for Nebraska, and it could lead to some tightness and some nerves if the team can read that from the fan base. That'll do it for our discussion on those two games. We'll get into our Sunday's headlines today, or Saturday's headlines for a Black Friday game today, right after this.
It was a passing game today after some Yeah, like I said, I think so much of it has gone to either, some injuries that have forced us to be inconsistent or, just time and, so many new faces in some of that passing game. And, it was awesome. I think that word is right. It was consistent. It was confident. I don't feel like Rocco's very much wavered from some of that process. I just think it's like, man, the rhythm of what it needs to look like with consistency. I think back to the TCU play on, Jace drops it and Rocco goes right back to him. And I think that's where real trust is involved. And, it's just, man, our game is one that it's constantly evolving and growing. And to play our best football in late November against all the odds, against all the stuff that's hit this team, I think it just says a lot about the character of this team, whether it's Rocco or whether it's, man, our great senior leadership. I've just been really impressed.
And then
Welcome back to CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday, talking Sunday's headlines today. I'll go ahead and lead us off. I think that the number one headline from Iowa versus Nebraska is "They Not Like Us." You hear it before every sporting event. You might even hear it during or after. I don't even know who sings the song or performs the song. I just know that there was one lyric, "They Not Like Us." And that's what Iowa's going to be thinking after they beat Nebraska in Lincoln. I said this is the game where Nebraska's trying to, prove that they've reached that standard that Iowa is, and I don't think they're going to do it because they not like us in Iowa. Number two, keep dreaming. Going into the season, I got to call out or shout out our friends over at the Omaha World Herald, Sam McEwen, before the season predicted that this would be the year Nebraska finally got over the hump that is Iowa at the end of the season. Said, it's just time that Nebraska beat Iowa. They're gonna, this is their white whale that they've been chasing, and they're finally gonna harpoon it like they did Wisconsin. They had a pretty rough history against the Badgers until last year when they beat Wisconsin to get bowl eligibility late in November, right before the Iowa game. The fans stormed the field. It was a big hoopla. Keep dreaming. It's not happening this year against the Hawkeyes. The Hawkeyes are well oiled. They might have some injuries, but they know what they are. Last week was an anomaly with how poorly they played. I don't expect that to be the situation in Lincoln. Kirk Ferentz likes to talk about how sometimes traveling can be easier than being at home because it's just so organized, it's so regimented that it doesn't really give much room for error. I think that will play into Iowa's favor. I think that there's going to be a lot of nerves in Memorial Stadium. I think that Nebraska might play tight, and so I just think it's not quite Nebraska's year. And then number three headline, on to basketball. I mentioned neither of these teams are playing for a bowl spot, a prestige bowl, or a college football playoff berth. And so I think that once this game's over, you might have the week of heckling back and forth, of Iowa fans sharing positive screenshots from the football game. But I think a lot of attention is going to turn towards the basketball season. You already were mixing in some basketball discussion on the Cyclones. Iowa certainly hitting a positive trajectory at the moment. Big win over Ole Miss in the Hutchins v. Petrick matchup last night. Ben's brother Sam covers the Rebels. So I think that there's going to be a lot of attention shifting towards basketball, where maybe last year where things were going slow in the final year of the Fran McCaffrey era, people were maybe a little bit more tuned into the Music City Bowl. But I think there's going to be a pretty notable shift in attention from football towards basketball. Ben, what can you tell me about the Iowa State versus Oklahoma State game and what I should expect to be reading the headlines as for your stories?
Before I tell you about that, I'll tell you about Kendrick Lamar. Ethan, "They Not Like Us" is a Kendrick Lamar song. I thought nobody could be more musically illiterate than me, but here we are.
I haven't seen Kendrick Lamar featured on any Mumford & Sons songs recently, so that would probably be why.
Gotcha. I'm more of a country music guy myself, maybe because of the 4 years I spent in Stillwater, which is also my first headline for Sunday. But there's a space. Stillwater. Oklahoma State is a little bit of a stagnant program right now, Ethan. I think that they are ready for this season to be over. They are done. And I think there's a chance they pop up and show a little bit of fight, but I just don't know if the talent is there. Iowa State is a 14-point favorite, and I think they go in and take care of business in Stillwater. But there is a chance, and the last of Gundy is something that Coach Matt Campbell said he's kind of able to see when he turned on the film, specifically of OSU's last two games. He said there's a lot of fight in that locker room. They show a lot of heart, and that's evidenced in the one-score losses to K-State and UCF. So there is a little bit of the old proud OSU, the program that has been right up there with Matt Campbell's Iowa State in terms of the successful teams in the Big 12 over the last decade, 15 years. So there is a little bit of Gundy, even as he's now living on the ranch with his goats out in Stillwater. And Eric Morris is the new head coach at OSU, kind of that next wave. And then we're going to mix in a basketball headline to end. Easy come, easy go. Out in Las Vegas, Iowa State got $1 million just for showing up, and they struck out on the roulette wheel. It came up in the black, and they put everything on the red. Iowa State does not get any of the big money bonus that comes with making a first, second, or third or fourth place appearance. So unfortunate for the Cyclones after a 2-0 start, and they play Syracuse right after we get off of this show recording. So that is going to benefit them come March, but they struck out on the wheel this time around.
Before we go, top 3 Thanksgiving foods, what's going to be on your plate tomorrow? I got a dinner roll, mashed potatoes, and turkey as my top 3 favorite Thanksgiving type foods. I know you can get those basically at any fancy dinner or any fun dinner with your grandparents, but now that tends to be my go-to on Thanksgiving. So those are my top 3. What's yours?
I respect it. I'm going to go number 1, my mom's corn souffle. That's her signature Thanksgiving dish. So good. And I'm going to go 2, turkey, Ethan, but I'm a dark meat guy. I skip over the light meat and get straight to the dark meat on my turkey. And 3, you have to throw in some pumpkin pie with whipped cream on top. I'm a heavy whipped cream on top guy with my pumpkin pie.
That'll do it for CyHawk Talk here on Wednesday. Be sure to tune in on Sunday. We'll give you guys a Sunday recap, maybe look ahead a little bit more at the basketball season as we're recapping football season, give some talk about bowl projections a little bit as well. Thanks for watching. Be sure to tune back in.